Welcome to the Flag Bearer channel. This is Little Known Black History Facts. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel.
We're going to give every last one of you 40 acres and a mule.
What really happened to our 40 acres and the mule? In order to find out, we have to go to the beginning of what led to that concept. The Ebenezer Creek Massacre preceded the actual decision to give a group of freed slaves land that was confiscated from rebel Confederate states in the first and only effort by the U.S. government to give reparations to freedmen. During the Civil War, many slaves took advantage of the Northern Army's incursions into the South to run away from plantations and declare themselves free. Technically, after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, they were free. Former slaves who attached themselves to Union Army units were referred to as contraband of war. Contraband because they had been the property of Southern plantation owners. Thousands would camp outside federal camps as a way of protecting themselves from Confederates who would seek to return them to slavery or even kill them. The contrabands proved both valuable and sometimes a nuisance for Union Army operations. Many served as scouts for the Union Army, since they knew the lands on which they had been enslaved. Many others worked as laborers and were paid wages. Still, others were seen as a problem for the Federal Army, because those who could not work often begged for food, and the Army could not accommodate them because it could barely feed its own troops. A group of refugee slaves, following a platoon of General William Tecumseh Sherman advancing on Savannah, Georgia in his infamous March to the Sea, became the impetus for the now famous Field Order No. 15, in which the general granted slaves 40 acres. On December 9, 1864, on the march to Savannah, hundreds or thousands of black refugee families who had just escaped from slavery were left to drown by Sherman's army. This is referred to as the Massacre at Ebenezer Creek. Ebenezer Creek, an area surrounded by woods about 20 miles outside of Savannah, Georgia, became a death trap for newly freed slaves, with their dreams of finally seeing freedom turned into a nightmarish hell on earth. Some estimate that as many as 5,000 refugees, made up primarily of women, children, and old men, had been following a platoon of about 14,000 Union troops of the 14th Corps who were quickly advancing on Savannah as part of the Union Army's march to the sea. General Sherman expressed his concern that thousands of refugees were slowing down his army. When Sherman and his troops arrived at the swollen waters of Ebenezer Creek, which was about 160 feet wide and 10 feet deep, General Jefferson C. Davis, not the Confederate president, ordered his engineers to build a temporary pontoon bridge to cross it. By midnight, the bridge was ready, and Davis's 14,000 men began their crossing. The freed people anticipated crossing with the soldiers, but Davis ordered his provost marshal to prevent this. As soon as some of the troops were over the creek, orders were given to the engineers to take up the pontoons and not to let a Negro cross. On the pretense that there was likely to be fighting in front, the refugees were told not to go upon the pontoon bridge until all the troops and wagons were over. A guard was detailed to enforce the order. Upon Davis's orders, Union engineers cut the bridge loose and drew it up onto the shore and removed pontoon bridges that they had just used to cross Ebenezer Creek. Confederate horsemen were in hot pursuit, quickly gaining on the rear of the platoon led by Davis. Davis was said not to like black people, and though he was fighting on the side of the Union, he was said to be a staunch supporter of slavery. The stranded refugees were left on their own, effectively betrayed by Davis. The bridge removal sent cries of agony through the former slaves, and many tried to swim across the creek to continue their pursuit of the Union troops. Panic set in amongst the freedmen because they were aware that Confederate cavalry was fast approaching, and some were crushed in the stampede that ensued. Confederate cavalry troops under Major General Joseph Wheeler rode into the chaotic scene, shooting and slashing the abandoned slaves. Men, women, and children rushed by the hundreds into the cloudy waters of the Ebenezer Creek, trying to escape the onslaught. Many drowned. Thousands of the stranded refugees were stabbed and clubbed by Confederate soldiers who were hiding in the woods shortly after the bridge was disassembled. General Sherman's army on the other side of the river were not able to defend them from the attack. It was reported that several Union soldiers on the eastern bank tried to help, wading in as far as they could to pull in those on floating devices and pushing logs out to the few refugees still swimming. Because the able-bodied refugees were up front working in the Pioneer Corps, most of those stranded would have been women, children, and old men. Some historians contend that the horrific events were not a coincidence, but part of Davis's plan to rid himself of the former slaves. Davis was never reprimanded, and the refugees who were not killed by the Confederates that day were captured and returned to slavery. A public outcry ensued, as the massacre was reported by several Union soldiers who witnessed it. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton visited with General Sherman to have him explain what happened. General Sherman, supposedly feeling bad for what had happened at Ebenezer Creek, called on several local black pastors to seek advice on how to grant black people a better life in the South. Sherman and Stanton met with the pastors in Savannah days later on January 12, 1865. 4 days later, President Abraham Lincoln approved Sherman's Special Field Order No. 15, confiscating over 400,000 acres of coastal property and redistributing it to former slaves in 40-acre tracts. Sherman issued the Army Proclamation, giving land to newly freed blacks, largely in part of the advice from his meeting with the pastors, which began a national debate on reparations. In Part 2, I will discuss how this meeting led to the discussion and implementation of the 40-acre plan, and then how it was so quickly dissolved. Until next time, if you like little-known history facts as I do, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Press the bell to be notified of future uploads. Thank you for watching.